So it's 2023 and you may have a camera by now and you're thinking you want to upgrade because, I don't know, you want the latest and greatest, or you're just thinking you've outgrown the specific camera that you're using and you just want something else that will help you create something a bit different, something better, something new, something exciting. Maybe you just want to have a new camera because it just has a better workflow, ergonomics. I've used a ton of Sony cameras. Now, Sony do send me a lot of their pre-production cameras, which is amazing, and that gives me the opportunity to test so many new cameras that are coming out, and that has given me the opportunity to test pretty much all of the Sony cameras, which gives me an idea of what the camera's pros and cons are and who that is actually suited towards, because that's what this video is about. This video is trying to help you decide what camera suits your needs. Now, I can't recommend the Sony FX30 to Joe Blogs over there because his needs might be different to Jane Doe. She might need to have a better camera for photography, and obviously the FX30 is a video camera. So we're going to be discussing specific cameras that I've tested, specific ones that I've tested, not any of the other ones, but luckily I've tested pretty much all of them in the whole range, except for the A9 series. I've never ever touched the A9 series, but we're going to be getting into this, so it's going to be a pretty detailed video, well, somewhat detailed video, and I will try and skim through it as best as possible and hopefully give you some recommendations on what camera you might want to get in 2023. So we're going to be starting out with the Sony ZV series. Now the ZV-1 and the ZV-1F, they are roughly the same, but they're kind of different in certain ways because the ZV-1 pretty much had a zoomable lens, whereas the ZV-1F is the newest version, which has a prime lens, and it is a fixed, I think it's like a 20mm full frame equivalent lens, and obviously you can't zoom in it, but it has slightly newer technology. It was kind of suited towards vloggers and Twitch streamers, YouTube streamers, all those kind of people that would actually just need a wide angle lens. Now, the ZV-1 had a lot of flack because it didn't have a wide enough lens for people that were vlogging. But sure, it was a phenomenal camera when it came out because it's literally pocketable. You could pretty much have a top pocket and put it in the top pocket. It is that small. It is a really great camera for people who just want to live stream, who want to vlog, who want to take some basic photos. That still does 4K video as well, so you could take some pretty decent videos. And it does have ND filters inside, so you can still film with that 180-degree shutter rule with no problems. That is a great thing with such a small camera, and obviously just the size, the sheer size of it is just, it's so small, you can literally take it anywhere. So it does definitely suit the beginner content creator, someone who just wants to make basic videos, potentially someone who wants to make tutorials and stuff, basic tutorials, anyone who needs a top-down shot camera, because the autofocus is nice and fast, but it still won't match up to the higher end APS-C cameras and obviously the full frame cameras because it does only have a 1-inch sensor. Now we'll move on to the Sony's last APS-C camera. Besides the FX30, it's the Sony ZV-E10. Now they have used that sensor for what, maybe 6 years? I think that same sensor since the A6300. They did the 6300, 6400, 6500, the 6600 and the 6100 at the same time. And then they pretty much just reused that sensor and put it into the Sony ZV-E10. But literally a fraction of the cost of the 6600. Like literally, I think you can buy it for maybe $700-800 now US. That's pretty cheap, especially because it does 4K 30. It still shoots an S-Log 3, but it's only 8-bit codec, so it's not great for using S-Log. But it has got that full flip screen. It has the newest gyro data technology in the Sony cameras that you can stabilize in post-production. The Sony ZV-E10 is actually a phenomenal beginner's camera because it's suited towards photographers, potentially. Doesn't have an EVF, so that is a bit of a con when it comes to photography, and if you are used to putting the camera up to your eye. But it can suit vloggers. Sure, it doesn't have IBIS, but it has active steady shot, and Yeah, the rolling shutter is pretty horrendous, so if it is shaking around a bit, you'll start to see some warpiness going on. And it is an old sensor, but it is a very cheap camera, and it is a great camera to actually learn on. The Sony ZV-E10 has a ton of lenses because Sony have started to invest in their APS-C line. They've brought out the, the 11mm, the 15mm, and the 10 to 20 PZ lens, which is phenomenal. I love that lens. And hopefully they're going to be investing more into the APS-C lenses coming this year, and so on and so forth. So ZV-E10 is a great camera for beginners. Now moving into the A7S range. Now this is an interesting one because the A7S III took, I think it was about 4 years since the A7S II, and people were just waiting forever. But when the A7S III dropped, absolute game changer. 4K, 120 frames per second, no crop, brilliant low light performance with pretty much a dual base at 640 and 12,800. It has the new 10-bit 422 codec, which is incredible because S-Log3 is now usable, and it does have that S-Cine tone. The A7S III it's an incredible camera. And unfortunately, it's been sort of shone down by the limelight because the FX3 pretty much is a slightly better version of that. But it's got that 9.44 million dot EVF, which no one had ever heard of. And it was in a video camera. Like, why would you need a quality EVF in a very small mirrorless camera? I can understand when you do have broadcast cameras like the FX6 and you're doing an over-the-shoulder shot and you're trying to look through the EVF, I can understand that. But you're not going to be doing that with the A7S III. So why 9.44 million dots? But anyway, I digress. The A7S III is a phenomenal camera for filmmakers, potentially for people who do want to take some photos, because it does take some stills. Sure, it's only 12 megapixel stills, but it still works perfectly fine. But if you are a wedding videographer, if you are a real estate videographer, if you love to make short films, if you love to do YouTube work, the A7S III is definitely for you, because the price on that thing is going down, and there are most likely a whole bunch of A7S IIIs out there on Facebook Marketplace, secondhand sort of stuff. It's a great camera to get if you're a filmmaker. Now the A7R line. Now I tried out the A7R5 for a couple of weeks. That camera is a beast. I absolutely love it. 61 megapixels, 8K in video. You can do 4K, 60 frames per second. Obviously no 4K 120 because they're saving that for the A7S, and now obviously the FX3, FX6, and the FX30, which we'll talk about soon. But when it comes to photography, this camera is probably for you because it has incredible focus. When it comes to photography, there are so many different features compared to the previous series, and even the object tracking. There's a whole bunch of other ones now. Animal eye autofocus, you've got plane, trains, all those kind of things that you can actually focus on. The focus technology is incredible in that camera because it is the newest one, and it does have the newest technology inside it. And if you are someone who does a lot of interview work, 8K might be an option because that gives you the option to crop in post, and it almost looks like you have another camera, literally just punching in post because you've shot in 8K. And it also has that 10-bit codec as well, which seems to be pretty much consistent throughout all the Sony new cameras now. But overall, I do feel the A7R series is still a photography first camera. It's pretty much suited towards photographers. It has all the features that you need to be a professional photographer for wildlife photography, sports photography, even obviously editorials, because it does have that high resolution sensor that's going to give you incredible detail, and obviously the ability to crop in and pretty much not lose any information. It's just a phenomenal camera, especially if you are a photographer. The A7 IV. This camera is what I'm shooting on now, and this camera is the most used camera that I had in 2022. It's It's an incredible camera. It does a lot. It does more than a lot. It matches up to some pretty impressive cameras. The image quality is phenomenal. A 7K sensor that downsamples to 4K. It gives you the best looking 4K footage. Sure, the rolling shutter is not great. It's 26 milliseconds. And you know, the A7S III, the FX3 is 8.7 milliseconds. So it's significantly different when it comes to rolling shutter. So if you are vlogging, you may see some warpy lines and stuff. If you are whipping the camera left and right like a crazy person, you will see some rolling shutter. But if you're filming normally like a normal person, it's perfectly fine. It's a phenomenal camera. Sure, it does have that crop in 4K 60. It's not full frame 4K 60. 1080p, you can do 10-bit codec, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I use actually quite a lot. Until the FX30, I do use that a lot because it does have 4K 120 frames per second. Sure, that obviously does have its cons as well. But the A7 IV is very well priced. It suits hybrid photographers and videographers because it's a 33 megapixel sensor, so you can get some incredible looking photos out of it. The burst rate is only 10 frames per second, and if you do want to have uncompressed RAW, it's only about 6 frames per second. So it's not crazy fast. It may not be perfect for sports photography or wildlife photography because of that burst rate reason. But overall, I think the A7 IV is just that camera that does everything. Really, the A7 IV should almost be called the A7H IV because it's a hybrid beast. It does photos pretty damn well. It does videos pretty damn well. I think it's just an all-over hybrid camera. So if you are a person that wants to do photos, person that wants to do videos, A7 IV is the one for you. Now the Alpha 1. Do I really need to say more? The Alpha 1 obviously is the cream of the crop, the top of the range, the Lamborghini of all cameras. The A1 is the one to get if you do want to shoot 8K, if you want to shoot 4K, 120 frames per second, if you want that really fast sports and wildlife photography, because it has a stacked sensor. So the rolling shutter performance is incredible. It can shoot up to 30 frames per second in stills. That's mind-boggling, incredible. I know a lot of the newer cameras with Canon and Nikon actually do high frame rates as well, but this is the flagship camera for Sony. The Alpha 1 is brilliant. The only downfall that I don't like is it doesn't have a full flip screen, whereas the A7R5 has that flip up, flip out, and the full articulating. It's the best invention ever when it comes to flip screens because you got the best of both worlds. You can flip up, you can flip it out, you can rotate it around. It has everything, and I wish the A1 had at least a flip screen, at least, because there are so many situations where I do want to shoot vertical and you can't flip it vertical. And I know, vertical, Instagram, blah, 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 social media. Unfortunately, it's the way of the world, and you do need to follow the way that the world is going. And vertical shooting is here to stay because all our phones are still going to be in that 9:16 mode. So get used to it. And I do wish that it did have that fully articulating screen. But other than that, the A1 is pretty much perfect. Sure, there are a few issues with the A1 because Sony are holding back a few firmware updates that a lot of the new cameras have some features and the A1 doesn't, which is interesting because the A1 should have pretty much everything in it because it's meant to be, you know, the top of the range, the flagship camera that has everything. But if you are a hybrid shooter, if you're a photographer, videographer, sports and wildlife, the A1 obviously is for you. Okay, let's jump over to the cinema series, the FX30. We'll start with the FX30. The FX30 is the newest APS-C camera that has dropped with Sony, and it is also the newest in the Cine line. And this one is an interesting camera. It has a whole bunch of pros, it has a whole bunch of cons, but it's in the Cine line and it's an APS-C camera. It's pretty much the new version of their older FS5 and FS7s, which were the Super 35 cameras that were replaced by the FX6 and the FX9. But this one slots right under there, underneath the FX3 as an APS-C camera, an entry into the cinema line. And the 4K 120 frames per second, sure, it's cropped, but it is a 1:1 readout, and it's pretty much a 1.5 times crop or a 1.6 times crop on top of that Super 35 crop. So it's a pretty significant crop, and you do have to take note of that. But that could be a pro for a lot of people who shoot wildlife videography or sports videography. And that is very interesting because it gives you that extra reach that you don't actually have to, punch in with clear image zoom, or you don't need a longer lens because it automatically punches in for you right there and then. It has an internal fan, so you're not going to have any overheating issues. It's pretty much built exactly like the FX30, which is really cool, and I love the form factor. I love the FX3. The FX3 is pretty much one of my favorite cameras of all time because it just has everything. But the FX30 has that 6K sensor that downsamples to 4K, so it is slightly sharper than the FX30 and FX6. The dynamic range isn't much different than the FX30 and FX6. It's pretty close, it's pretty on point. Because of that downsampled sensor, it tends to squeeze the noise, which makes it obviously less apparent and essentially giving you better signal to noise ratio. Now it does have that 10-bit 422, which obviously is absolutely great. The color science is very similar to the FX30 and FX6, so you can match it up as a B cam. Overall, if you are looking to get into videography, that camera is most likely for you. APS-C lenses are generally cheaper, but you can still use your full frame lenses with the FX30 as well. But if you're looking for a B cam and you have the FX3 or FX6, the FX30 is a really good option, especially the price. It's a great camera for the price. Now the FX3, if you're looking to get into the FX3, obviously it's an absolute beast. 4K, 120 frames per second, no crop, full frame. It's pretty much got time code in. It is Netflix approved, and it has that 12 megapixel sensor, so you pretty much have a brilliant 1:1 readout, super fast, rolling shutter performance of 8.7 milliseconds. It's pretty much got absolutely everything the A7S III has, but just that little bit more because it has Cine EI, which matches up with the FX6 and FX9 and the Sony Venice cameras as well. You are able to shoot in obviously your Type A cards or SD cards, just like the FX30 and FX6. And the great thing is if you do want professional XLR inputs, you do have that handle that comes with it, which gives you 2 professional XLR inputs, but also a 3.5mm audio jack in the handle, but also onto the body. Now that camera is pretty much suited towards videographers. You can take some stills, but it's pretty much suited towards filmmakers, wedding videographers, real estate videographers, anyone who wants to shoot videos. The FX3 definitely is a phenomenal choice and is going to be a really good option for at least another 3 or 4 years. Like, you could pretty much hold on to that camera for that long and it still be relatively relevant. Now lastly, the last camera that I've used is my FX6. Now that thing is an absolute workhorse. It's pretty much the FX3 on steroids. It's a phenomenal camera for broadcast work. It's great for commercials. Anyone who's looking to get into a higher end production and wants to work with a team, could be for solo documentary work, that camera can pretty much do it all. It does have that same dual base ISO as the FX3, and you can shoot ISO 800 or ISO 12800 and have really good clean image. It's got that internal ND filters, which is absolutely game changer because you can do auto ND, which completely adjusts the ND filters for you, and you can leave it obviously at 180-degree shutter, which makes it so much easier than adjusting the shutter speed, which is really annoying because it does have shutter angle, which is great, and I think all the Sony cinema cameras should have shutter angle. But overall, the ergonomics is just incredible because you can build it out, or you can actually make it super compact, super light, and you can run it on a gimbal if you really wanted to. But it's suited towards the higher end filmmakers who want to just up their level into the commercial space, documentary space, all those kind of things. You could still use it for YouTube work and all those kind of things, but it definitely has so much more benefits than the Sony mirrorless cameras. So anyway, guys, that is pretty much So anyway, guys, that is pretty much the cameras that I've used all the way up until now, and some of the recommendations for what you may want to purchase and what definitely does suit you if you're a photographer, videographer, a hybrid shooter, want to get into commercials. Hopefully these camera choices will help you guys out in deciding what you may actually want to invest in next, or if you're looking at a B camera, what may actually suit your situation for a B camera. But make sure you give this video a thumbs up, that'd be absolutely amazing. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.